Hey everybody, this is Todd Michael, host and creator of The Edvantage. Thank you so much for listening. I have one quick editorial note about this first episode. Due to the autobiographical nature of the content and the audio quality of the phone interview, I spliced in some background music and a few connecting narratives which give it an almost documentary like feel. All future episodes will follow a more standard, minimally edited, long form conversation type of interview with my guests. Now, on to the episode. Millions of children are educated every day in a myriad of settings. Homeschool, public school, private school, charter schools, online academies, learning pods, private tutoring, and more. Why are so many families transitioning to homeschooling? What advantages have they found? What unique challenges do they face? What have they learned, and how can listening to their experiences support your child's education? These are their stories. Together, we learn. This is The Edvantage. Hello, fellow educators, and thank you for listening. Today's guest is an educator who I respect and adore, my very first and only teacher for the first several years of my education, my mom, Gail Michael. After growing up in Southern California, she moved to the Central Coast where she raised me and my sister on her own. She has a bachelor's degree in art from Cal State Northridge with a minor in early childhood education. She is an experienced homeschool parent and grandparent, a decades-long homeschool advocate, and an accomplished watercolor artist. In this interview, she shares about her childhood experiences with her own education, how those experiences shaped her views of education, and what she learned about education through raising and teaching her own children. Our conversation took place over the phone, and as with most any time I call my mom, it started with some tech questions and stories of terrible customer service. I hope you enjoy the interview. All right, welcome, Gail Michael, to The Edvantage.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I call you Mom?
I don't.
It's a habit I picked up a while back. I don't know if I can break it for a podcast. So, I want to start off talking about the reason why. Thank you again for coming on the podcast. And the reason why I wanted to start with you as my first interview is because that's really where my education started with, as being my first teacher. But before we even talk about that, I would love to hear a little bit about your education. So, what stands out when you think back to your education, both as a kid, your later formal education, high school, college, any of that? What stands out in your memory, in your experience?
Well, I had some really good teachers who I still remember things that we did in their class. And I had some really horrible teachers who all I remember is their faces and them yelling. And they had black hair. There were women. Well, two of them were women. One of them was a man. Two of them, the women had black hair. They wore red lipstick. And they would make these really angry faces and yell at the class. And I don't remember anything else from their class except that. and then I had and that was in the second half of kindergarten.
Okay.
And in third grade. And then in fourth grade, I had a man teacher who was really old, and he was bald, and he lived on our street, actually. But he yelled all the time, and one of the little girls in the class got up and crying on the first day of class and ran out and ran to the office and called her mom and had herself changed to another class because she couldn't stand it. But so those were not good experiences.
So those were some of your first experiences in school. You're the first teachers that you had, right?
Yeah, the kindergarten one. Well, not the very first one, but the second half of kindergarten.
Right. Okay.
The first kindergarten was like heaven. I had this teacher. She was young. She was really, really kind, really, really nice. And we did fun things. It was like the best experience because I had seen my brother go to school for like a year and a half. He's older than me, so he had gone to school, and I was excited to go to school. And I was in her class, and she put on music, and we had these scarves, and we danced to rhythms, we did that every day. We had easel painting every day. She read us stories. We had snack. It was great. We got to sit on a rug and listen to stories, and it was just the funnest thing. But then the second half of kindergarten was like a disaster. So
Sure.
then I had this other fantastic. I had a really good teacher, man teacher in 5th grade who did fun things, like he had science. He had a tarantula in the classroom, and he had he did more science stuff, and we got to make little ashtrays or whatever out of clay, and we always did art every Friday. It was Friday afternoons we got to do art, and that was really fun. And then in 6th grade, and then some of the other teachers I had in early elementary, we did music every day. We did singing. We did we learned all the folk songs. We did music. We did dance. We had like a May festival every year. We did art projects and stuff. In 6th grade, I had this fantastic teacher who she had us make marionettes out of newspaper, folding newspaper and hooking them together with string that we made in class. And then she let us take them home and then dress them, and we got to paint the faces and all that. And then we took them home, made costumes, and brought them back. And we did this whole play about the Mardi Gras. And some of the like the one I made was a pirate who, that was his costume for the Mardi Gras. He was like one of the main characters in the play. So in the beginning of the play, it was another kid who had a puppet that was dressed, just kind of like a kid. And then when he went to the Mardi Gras, he was a pirate. And so we wrote the whole play, we learned all our parts, and then we put it on for the rest of the school. So that was like super memorable. And, and it was involving language and art and all those things.
Right, but more project-based, not just sitting at a desk learning.
Yeah. And then she had us do speeches all the time. So we did, and she taught us all the different kinds of speeches, like persuasive and entertaining and informative, and all these different ones. And then everyone in the class got to get up and give us a speech as part of the class. So that was really memorable and beneficial later on in education, to be able to do that and not be afraid to get up in front of a class. And then she also had us make notebooks that about the parts of speech. So we like if we were doing nouns, she'd have us take magazines and cut out all kinds of nouns and paste them in the notebook. And then if we were doing verbs, then we put down all kinds of action figures and stuff like that. So we learned the parts of speech by doing something meaningful and stuff like that. So she was a really, really good teacher. She was kind of older, but she was really patient, really good, and she just constantly was thinking of fun things and fun ways to learn, so you weren't just in the class. Because I remember when I was in kindergarten, it was fun because you got to play in the sandbox, you got to saw, we made stuff out of wood, we nailed and sawed and painted, and, or whatever we made an airplane and painted it and everything. That was really fun. And then I went, I went from being home, getting to do whatever I wanted to do, and going to kindergarten, having this great experience. Then the next year, summer came, and then we got to be home again. Then in 1st grade, I went back to school, and I had to sit in a desk in a row facing forward on a hard wooden chair and never did anything fun.
Right.
It was like just sat there and just pushed. You had a chunky pencil and newsprint paper papers that were mimeographed, which were like really, really bad copies.
Right.
And then you just had to sit there and do papers all day, and it was not fun.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine it would be.
Yeah, and so then summer came, and then I got to be free and do whatever I wanted. And then school happened again, and then it was somewhere between, like, I think first and second grade that the realization came to my mind that I had to be in school for most of my life, for the rest of my childhood, and it was devastating. Because at first I thought, oh, this is just a fun little thing I get to do, but then it was like, I have to be in this school setting where it's mostly just doing these papers.
Right.
And it was not fun. It was not fun. It didn't, I didn't really, I don't even remember most of the years of, the early education years, like, because the experiences weren't meaningful.
Right.
The only things I remember is like boys that I had a crush on.
Yeah.
The most frustrating thing for me in school was having to change gears constantly, because teachers, and especially, I remember it being especially in junior high and high school, because I think in elementary school there wasn't so much of a focus on homework. You'd have spelling words you had to learn at home, for the spelling test on Friday, but
sure,
there wasn't as much of a focus as there is now in schools. It seems like on just having homework packets and all this stuff you had to do at home, but so it seemed like you had more time in class to finish whatever you were doing, or you turned it in whenever the time was up or whatever. But in junior high and high school, you'd be in a math class, the teacher's explaining, how to do these math problems or whatever, and then you'd start doing them out of your book or whatever. And then the bell rings and you got to go to an English class.
Mm-hmm.
And your mind is thinking math, and so you got to put it away and you go to English class. And then the teacher's talking about, you're writing a paper, you're going to do whatever. And so then you start writing your paper, boom, the bell rings, and then you got to go to PE. And then you're running the track, you're taking a shower, you're putting your clothes on, they're sticking to your back because you can't dry them off. and then you got to go to history. It's like, then at the end of the day, you have to take all of your books home because you got to finish everything that you started. And every teacher thinks their class is all you have to do in your life, and that's it. So they're only focused on that subject. They don't see you as a person. They are focusing on that.
Right.
And then I had to ride the bus to and from school for junior high and high school, and the buses were really crowded, so there were 3 to a seat. So invariably, I'd be the third one, which meant you had about 3 inches of seat that you could fit one half of your seat on, and your leg is holding the rest of your weight up, and you're trying to juggle your book bag with all these books, to take home, and then you have to figure out, where you were at 9 in the morning when your teacher was explaining the math, and
right,
where your brain was when you were trying to write a paper. It was
wow,
horrible. I absolutely hated that part of it. Like I used to wish, like, if I could just sit there and finish my math, that would be great, because then I could really absorb what I was doing and then go and do whatever the next subject was.
Sure.
And not have to constantly be ping-ponging back and forth. In the summer between 4th and 5th grade, they had this fantastic program for summer school where kids got to do dancing and plays and art and all these great projects. And so I got to be in that class, I thought, and I went to summer school. And when I got there, they said, oh, that class is full. We're going to put you over here in this remedial class. So I was in this class. I was just...
Is that what they called it at the time? They called it a remedial class? Or that's just, you knew that's what it was?
Remedial, yeah. It was like for people that were not doing well in school.
Right.
And I was doing great in school. Academically, I was doing fine, and I was supposed to be in another class, but because it was crowded, they stuck me in this class. So there was maybe like 2 or 3 girls in the class. The rest are all boys. The principal of the summer school was the janitor during the year.
Sure.
And so I didn't even know how he qualified to be the principal of the summer school, but he was in charge. And so I went home the first day, and I told my grandma that I'm in the wrong class. I don't want to be in that class. It's boring. there's all boys in the class. It's not fun. It's, we have to just sit there and do math and handwriting and, just basics and stuff. I want to be with my friends, because at recess I'd go hang out with my friends. They'd talk about, oh, we're doing this, it's so fun, and
Right.
blah, blah, blah. And then, so she came up to the school and she talked to him, and he didn't budge. He was just like, oh no, well, we don't have room in that class. It's already crowded. So you have to be in that class. And instead, I still am baffled of why I didn't get to just not be in summer school. But
Right.
that whole summer, I had to be in that class.
At
and
that
it
point.
was awful, because that wasted my whole summer, and then I had to go back to school. Fortunately, in fifth grade, I had a good teacher and stuff, but
Yeah.
it was a sad summer.
I imagine.
Because I didn't gain anything. It was all stuff I already knew.
Right. What were the attitudes of the other kids? Like, you said there was a bunch of boys in the class. What were their attitudes? Were they getting anything out of it themselves, or was it pretty much miserable for all involved?
I think it was probably even more miserable for them, because they were struggling.
Right.
And they weren't being challenged, or they weren't being, it was mostly just rote. Do these math papers, practice your handwriting.
Yeah.
Maybe do some reading or something. I don't even remember that, but I just remember having to do a lot of math papers that were really boring, and they were probably just really hard for the other kids.
Sure.
It wasn't like the teacher was, I don't even remember who the teacher was. I have no recollection of the teacher. I just have recollection of thinking it was kind of odd that now the janitor was the principal.
It was just a mop leaned up at a desk in the corner to make you guys assume there must be a teacher in the room.
Probably. I don't know. If the principal was the janitor, who knows who the teacher
Exactly. As my mom shared more stories, it became clear that her early years of education had a significant impact on her, and often in a negative sense. She talked about the little girl in her class who always turned in perfect papers that got put up on the board. This continued for several years. My mom's papers were never picked. She told of high school teachers who each wanted her to pursue a career as a teacher in their subject: Latin, English, history, but nobody ever asked her what she enjoyed doing, which was art. After reluctantly starting classes at her local junior college, only because she thought it could help her make good money as a preschool teacher, a career that was unusually high-paying at the time, she decided to push through all of her general ed classes, taking as many as she could at a time. She would study for each test and got A's, although she found the subject matter as uninteresting and not memorable as always. Finally, after several years of school being a burden that got in the way of what she actually wanted to be doing, she was able to start focusing on her major.
And I finally transferred to the four-year college, and I had already gotten all of the general ed requirements out of the way, and I finally could major in art, which is what I wanted to do, but never felt like I could, because I had teachers saying, you should be a Latin teacher, you should be a math teacher, you should be an English teacher.
Right.
So I had this, no one was ever saying, you should be an art teacher. You're so good in art, you would be great, or you should be an artist, or you should just improve your art skills or do some art. I didn't have anybody validating that. But then finally, when I got to the four-year college, I was like, I'm majoring in art. And it was like liberating. I just felt like, wow, now I can finally do something that I'm interested in and, get some benefit from. Except that, even in that setting, I was like, I remember when I first was going there, I was taking I had a painting class, and I had drawing class, and I had a ceramics class where we were learning to throw a cylinder on a wheel.
Mm-hmm.
But they were back to back. So it was like you're in ceramics for an hour. Now you're trying to throw a cylinder, and you've got clay all over your clothes and all over your hands and everything. And now you got to hurry up and go to your painting class. Right. And they're going to be painting for an hour. I think they were 2-hour classes, but you're, painting for 2 hours, and then you got to, now you're you're drawing, and now, you know what I mean? It was still shifting gears, even though it was something I wanted to be doing, but I would have liked to just be able to stay and throw a cylinder, and as long as it took me to learn how to do that, or
Right.
painting, you know, so you're painting a little bit. And then what was funny is I had this really good, he was an artist who taught. He wasn't, you know, a teacher teaching art. He was an artist who was teaching. And so, but he was funny. He was this little German man. His name was Hans Burkhardt. And he used to brag about he had the most complete collection of his own works that existed. Which might have been a way of saying he never sold anything.
Right.
I don't know. But it was, he would always say that. And he had a really heavy German accent. And he expected everyone to paint like him.
Interesting.
So what he would do is he would come around to when you were painting, he would come around the room. He would just kind of circulate around the room. He would take your brush out of your hand, and he would paint on your painting to make it look like he wanted it. And then he'd hand it back to you and tell you to go ahead. But you had no clue what go ahead meant in his mind.
Right.
It wasn't what was in your mind. So what I would do in his class was I would just kind of like, you know, dabble a little bit until he came around again. And then he would take my brush and go ahead with his painting. And so then he would just go, oh yeah, that looks great, because it was what he was doing.
So he was basically painting a dozen or two paintings simultaneously.
Yes, they were hilarious, because some of the kids would not, you know, they were so set on doing what they were doing, they didn't appreciate him touching their work, or some of them wouldn't let them.
Sure.
But I would always, you know, let him go ahead, because I would just be like, okay, let's see what he's going to do now. But
That's
it wasn't
really
like,
funny.
you know, he was validating my style or what I was doing. And then he was funny, because when it came time for report cards, he would get a paper towel. He would grab a paper towel out of the dispenser and a pen, and he'd come around the room and he'd look at your whatever you were doing, and then he'd ask you what your name was, because he didn't ever know your name. He never took roll. He didn't care what your name was. Then he'd write down your name and give you a grade based on what was happening right then.
Oh, wow.
And so I always got an A in his class because it was his painting.
Right.
The problem I see mainly in education, in public education, is that kids are being fed what a teacher wants to feed them, but they're not being taught how to think or how to learn what they're interested in.
Right. And in many cases, it's not even what the teacher wants to teach them. It's what the teacher is being told. Right. And so
Exactly.
there's even the layer farther removed of, if the teacher could have a little more latitude, they'd even be incorporating more interesting things. But because they're under mandates, or because their administrators are under their own mandates, it's kind of continues up the chain till you get to the adopted standards and funding and all of those things. But yeah, it's very much a superimposed structure, a superimposed set of standards. It is very rarely, depending on the setting, but if we're talking about public education, very rarely is it student-led, student interest, student voice and choice. Those buzzwords get thrown around to perform for the powers that be, but in actuality, in practice, there's just not time in the day to fit everything in that's required and then give that leeway.
The other thing I noticed with public school, with Kendra being in public school, my daughter, is that when she was in 5th grade, they did standardized testing, and so I went up to the office unannounced, and I just said, well, I was just curious to see if the test scores were back and how she had done. And the principal, who was not expecting anyone to show up, he said, oh yeah, let me see, I have them here. So he got them out, and he looked at hers, and he said, oh, she scored in the, I think it was like the I don't remember what it was. It was like maybe the 49th percentile or something in reading.
Okay.
I said, well, that's not very good. I said, well, what is the average in her class? What are kids scoring? How do the other kids score? And he said, oh, well, we get extra funding for the kids that score low. So it was like he was pleased with her performance. He didn't care that meant that she was below grade level.
Wow.
It didn't matter to him. It was like, oh, well, that's, in his mind, he was saying that was good.
Yeah, your daughter's a cash cow for the school. Congratulations.
Yeah. Yes. Then they flipped it, a few years after that, they flipped it. Someone caught on that that's not a good policy. So we're going to start giving the schools more funding for the kids that are scoring higher. So then a friend of mine who had a daughter in school, the daughter came home and said, oh, we did the standardized testing. And the teacher just read it was really fun because the teacher just read the questions and then she told us the answers. So, it's like
from bad to worse.
There was a big push at that time that someone in the upper echelons of education decided that schools that had more homework, the students scored better. So the teachers, decided that the more homework you gave kids, somehow that was going to make their school experience better.
Wow. So, which, interestingly enough, has since been debunked by many different studies and
well, yeah.
Anyone who observes a child's day-to-day experience could have told you that. But yeah, that was not an accurate assumption on their part, whoever decided that at the time. Continue.
So the homework wasn't anything meaningful. It was just busy work. It was just, but you had to send home homework starting in kindergarten because somehow that was just going to enhance the experience. So she would come home with homework. And like when she was in kindergarten, her first experience with bringing home homework was the little girl who lived next door, who was someone who liked to do papers and liked to, she was probably very left-brained and liked the whole thing of doing a paper and having it completed. She was probably one of the ones that the paper got up on the board. I don't know, but she came over to play, and then Kendra had this paper to do, and then she was like, "Oh, here, I'll do it for you." And I was like, "No, you won't." But for Kendra, that was the last thing she wanted to do was paper.
Right.
So it would be this constant struggle every single day of first you got to get your kid up and dressed and ready and out the door to school. Then they come home and they're burnt out, they're tired, you're burnt out, and then it's this constant struggle from the time they get home from school till bedtime of, are you going to do your homework? You need to do your homework. When are you going to do your homework? It's like, and you can't have them do it right after school because they're too burned out. Like there's no way they have any concentration left.
Sure.
And then as day wears on, they have less, and then you have less patience and less motivation to have them do the homework. But the homework is like the preeminent thing that has to be done. It's like the focus of the day, and it's just busy work.
Right.
And it's multiple papers and multiple, now I think in some of the schools what they do is they'll send home a homework packet on Monday and you have to turn it in on Friday. So
right.
Or leeway. But at that time it was like these papers have to come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so they have to be done today, and it was horrible. It was horrible. So, she'd be tired, she'd be, cranky. I would get, impatient. I'd be like, you need to do your homework. When are you going to do your homework? Let's do your homework. Just like, and I would hate it. I would absolutely hate it. I used to say to her, I'm going to tell your teacher, I'm going to send a note to school. I'm going to tell your teacher that you didn't make your bed. Because if she's making me do your homework, then she should make you do your
your chores.
Because I just felt like that's her job, and what are you doing for the other 6 hours a day?
Right.
If all the papers are being sent home, the papers should be done at school. It wasn't like you didn't finish it. You didn't even start it.
Yeah. True.
So when and then her, when I'd say to her, like she was having, she'd bring home a report card or whatever, and it would say she was not doing well in reading or whatever. And I'd say, well, do you do reading at school? Well, she was in 3rd grade, and she said, well, the teacher just says as long as you have a book on your desk and you're quiet, you don't have to, that's all you have to be doing. So she said, so I can't read the book I have. It's too hard. So what would happen is the teacher would take the whole class to the school library and tell them to pick a book. And then when they called it sustained silent reading.
Yep.
They'd have sustained silent reading every day for 40 minutes. And the rule was your book has to be on your desk and you have to be quiet. And no one bothered to tell her, this is your section over here of the library. These are the ones that are at your level, so pick a book over here. So
right.
She would just, any book, and it would be like, she's in 3rd grade, it's a 6th grade level book, and she's reading on maybe a 2nd grade level. So
right. Wow.
I didn't read it. So I went up, I started going up I talked to the teacher, and I started going up to the class every day at sustained silent reading time. And I would take her out of the class to a table outside. The class was like a picnic table right outside the classroom. And I'd just sit with her and have her read a book that was on her level. And then her reading improved. And it wasn't improving because she was never doing it. She just learned that if you be quiet, and she'd say, the kids next to me are more fun to listen to than try to read a book that's above my level. So she would just, be paying attention to what because there was a kid that sat across the aisle from her that would draw during that time. So she'd be looking at his pictures that he was drawing. Because as long as you were quiet and had a book on your desk.
Right. Which I imagine the teacher was probably using that time to get their own work done or do whatever.
Yeah.
It was for them. It was a break, right?
The teacher was up at her desk, and the only time she would notice is if someone was talking, and then she'd call them out on talking. But she would be up there prepping for the next subject.
How long did that go on? That you were going there and reading with her?
That was for the rest of that year. That was like the whole 3rd grade year.
Wow.
And I was pregnant with you at the time.
My mom had already been raising my sister on her own and was now preparing to add another kid to her busy days. Fitting in as much part-time work as she could, relying on public assistance to offset her expenses, and all with virtually no support from extended family members, she was living a reality that far too many parents have to face: the choice between full-time employment and full-time parenthood. To her, having less money in her bank account was far less concerning than risking letting her kids be raised by strangers. At this pivotal time, the very public school system that was supposed to be lightening her burden was failing her and her daughter, and it only seemed to get worse from there.
When she was in 5th grade, they decided to move 6th graders into middle school, which used to be junior high, but now they were calling it middle school. So 6th graders, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders were all being sent to middle school. And so I felt like a 6th grader and an 8th grader there's such a gap in their social and physical development that I chose to homeschool her for 6th grade.
Okay.
So we started out, and I was just going to do homeschool with her, and but then because homeschool wasn't really a popular option at that time. So they referred a truant officer, sent me a letter, and that I needed to come in and meet with this truant officer or whatever. So then they had me go, and at the time I didn't realize that I could have signed a private school affidavit and become my own private school.
Right. And the truancy officer wasn't going to volunteer that information, I'm sure.
Right. So I ended up having to have her in a program where I would take her once a week to meet with this lady who was the homeschool coordinator, teacher, whatever. She would give her a packet of basically busy work, and then you'd have to bring it back a week later. So it was basically public school to go.
Right.
So she did that, we did that. And, but I did spend a lot of time reading, with her reading.
Mm-hmm.
So her reading, she improved like 2 grade levels during that 1 year.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the year, she really, really wanted to go back to school because of the social aspect of it.
Right.
Not because, she thought she was going to learn anything, but just because she wanted to be with her friends. She wanted to go. She was, becoming a teenager. She was, wanting to do all that kind of stuff.
6th grade is a pretty social grade. Yeah, that's definitely a time where you're not wanting to necessarily have less contact with peers. If anything, you want more. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Until this conversation with my mom, I had never fully appreciated how much of a chance she had given public education before deciding to homeschool me. I guess I never really thought much about it. If I put myself in her shoes, I can understand why she ultimately became so skeptical of California schools. And after working in the system for the last decade, I can't really argue with most of the aspects with which she takes issue. Still, I recognize that most of the challenges she faced then were a result of a broken system that individual professionals couldn't fix. And my heart goes out to my friends and colleagues who are still facing many of the same inefficiencies. In the last portion of our interview, I asked my mom to share about her decision to homeschool me, what that experience taught her, and her perspective on public education today.
When you were going to go into kindergarten, there was a charter school that was happening, and they would only pick certain kids to go to the charter school. So it was kind of a lottery, type situation.
Mm-hmm.
But you were able to get into the charter school. So I had an appointment to come up and meet the kindergarten teacher with you, and we showed up. And there was a little girl who was ahead of you, and she was sitting on her mom's lap, and they were sitting across the desk from the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher was just going on and on about, oh, your dress is so pretty. Oh, you're such a cute little girl. I bet you're really smart, blah, blah, blah. And engaging her and talking to the mom and, the whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was your turn. And because you were really shy, you were standing behind me.
Absolutely. I remember it. I vividly remember this experience. Go ahead.
And the teacher never talked to you at all. She briefly talked to me and
Mm-hmm.
discounted you completely.
Yeah.
Never even asked your name, never, made an attempt to engage you.
Right.
And I was like, why would I want to drive all the way across town, because you had to supply transportation. There was no busing or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I want to drive across town twice a day to put my child in a situation where the teacher isn't even acknowledging that he exists?
Yeah.
So I decided that I would do homeschool.
And by that point, so this is, what, like 5 or so years, 6 years? No, I guess it was less than that after you homeschooled Kendra. It wasn't that far down the road. Had anything become more accessible for you to homeschool, or was it pretty much the same as with her, where your options were limited?
No, I think at that point I had found out that if you file a homeschool affidavit, that you can declare yourself a private school, and then you can homeschool, and you're not. And because you had never really attended school, you were kind of off the radar.
Mm-hmm.
So no one ever, bothered me or interfered from the school district.
Interesting.
And part of the motivation was, the experience I'd had with Kendra of having to get her to school and then do the homework after school for the whole, the rest of the day. And so my thinking was, I would rather do school from like 9 to 12 in the morning hours when I'm fresh and you're fresh than to have to get you to school and then have to deal with the homework at night. So right. I just felt like it just made more sense to just, and plus the kind of kid that you were very creative, and you liked, kind of like just doing things on your own schedule. You weren't the kind of kid that just, wanted everything to be routine and wanted everything to happen in a sequence and all this kind of stuff. And I just felt like it would be way more relaxed and way more rewarding for you as well as me to just start doing homeschool.
And from my perspective, I mean, I didn't know any different in the early years, but once I started becoming aware of, my friends and neighbors and stuff, of what their school experience was like, I was baffled that anybody had to keep doing school after, like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, or some days I'd finish, if I was feeling especially focused, I'd finish by noon and I'd have the rest of the day free. And I loved it. And it was really depressing for me to see so many of my friends who would get home, and I'd be so eager to play with them, especially kids in the neighborhood, because that was mostly who I played with. I'd be so eager to play with them. Like, oh, my mom said I can't play till I do my homework. And be like, homework? You were at school all day. How long do we have to wait? So there'd be days where I'd have to wait till, like 4, 5 o'clock, 5:30 before they were ready to play. And I just thought, I mean, that was my main association with public school. I thought that'd be miserable. I'm so glad I have that ability to get everything done early in the day. So, I mean, not to say that everything was easy for me. It was definitely, there were times where I just didn't want to have to deal with any school, but that was always in the back of my mind too, of like, wow, I have so much more time and so much more freedom in my day versus these other kids who I see, it's like almost dinner time before their day even starts.
Yeah.
So in those years of homeschooling, and then comparing to kind of what you see now, is there anything that either you wish you knew back then, or like tools or opportunities or kind of systems that you see that exist to support homeschool families now that you wish you had then? I mean, it must have just been such a different world. I wonder what that comparison is like.
Well, when I was homeschooling you, I had pretty much the curriculum I had the series of books that were everything your kindergartner needs to know, everything your first grader needs to know up through 6th grade.
Right.
So it was kind of a good overview of what exactly is relevant in each subject that you need to learn. And then we had those programs that Annie Barbara sent that she had bought. There was the one where you diagrammed sentences with the little cards.
Right.
And then there was the math one that was Little Stevie that you hated.
Yeah.
The guy kept talking about Little Stevie knows his times table or whatever.
Little Stevie could do this activity in 12 seconds.
Yeah, and you'd always go, I hate Little Stevie.
Little did I know, Little Stevie was a little fictitious character that the creator was just using to bully and motivate everyone into trying to do better.
What? I thought he was real.
I doubt it.
I thought he was that little girl in my class.
Yeah, really. Maybe it was her son.
Probably was. Probably was. Some of the things that I noticed about homeschoolers in general is that from the homeschool group that we attended was that the homeschool kids, first of all, have a lot higher self-esteem in general than public school kids, because they're not constantly being compared to other students. And, they're basically, they have a different outlook on life. They get along better with people of different ages. Like I noticed when we went to the park, there'd be like 12 and 13-year-old girls playing with 3-year-olds and not thinking anything of it. Whereas in a school setting, if a kid is in second grade, they don't even relate to a third grader or a first grader.
Right.
They only relate to the peer that they're grouped with.
Yeah. I've even seen where kids just changing class, teachers will completely ostracize each other. Like, they'll be friends and be in the same class, and then one of them will have to change teachers for one reason or another. And it's like, oh, you're dead to me. I don't know you anymore. Yeah. Which is hilarious.
Yeah. It's really a weird thing that happens. They won't even look at you anymore.
And it's so unspoken. It's not like anybody says, there's no official expectation or anything. It's just this kind of hierarchy that exists and has for as long as I can tell, and I imagine will continue as long as there is such a thing as arbitrary grades based on age and nothing else.
Yeah. And it just carries over into every part of their life.
Right.
And then the other thing is that homeschoolers are not burnt out by the time they get to college. Because when you started college, I just remember you getting all excited when you had a history class, you had a weather,
meteorology
class. You were like all excited to learn it. And then you even commented on how the other kids in the class were just kind of like zombied out and they just weren't excited.
Yeah.
About learning, and you were like, oh, this is exciting, I'm going to learn something,
Right. The novelty had not worn off by any means. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. It's a good observation. So now looking at the current state of education, whether that's public, homeschool, just general, all things education, what are your takeaways? What are your views on what you see?
Well, what I see now is that public school is more about ideological indoctrination than about learning the basics or learning for children to learn to think.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in college, I took one of the classes I took was the sociological foundations of education is what it was called. And in the class it said that education is synonymous with enculturation.
Sure.
Which I thought was a weird concept at the time, because I never thought of education as being, enculturating people. But now it's more about indoctrinating.
Right.
I feel.
Right.
Everything I hear and see, and then the fact that the classes are all overcrowded and there's more emphasis on crowd management and on individual learning. I think that's one of the big problems.
Yeah.
And I feel like art and music are kind of like if they're included, like some of the schools have programs where they're included, but it's kind of like a
token.
Token, yeah. It's like it's an afterthought. We'll give you so many minutes of some form of art or music, and then that kind of we can check off that box.
Sure.
They aren't really encouraging kids to develop those areas or develop their creativity or be able to seek out what they're interested in, what they want to learn.
Right.
Like one of the things I noticed, there was a lady who was doing a homeschool overview, and she was talking about different styles of homeschooling, and one of them that she presented was child-led, where you say to the child, what would you like to learn today?
Sure.
And then you say, oh, I would like to learn about rocket ships, or I'd like to learn about, whatever it is they're interested in. And then you go, okay, well, let's see what we can find about that. And then you go to the internet and you look it up, or you go to the library or whatever your sources are, and let them decide. Because I remember, like, now looking back at my education, like most of it was irrelevant to my life. And now
Right.
when I think about something, I think, well, like, like if somebody starts talking about American history or something, I'll think, oh yeah, I remember learning something about that, but the details are kind of foggy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because at the time, when you're like, third grade, fourth grade, whatever, you don't have enough life experience to even know why that's relevant to you.
Sure.
And then when you get older, you think, well, yeah, that would be nice to know who the president was at that time, or how the Declaration of Independence was formed, or how the Constitution came to be, or what the Revolutionary War really was about, or you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
But at the time, it's just like you're just regurgitating facts, the way it was presented to me. So I feel like if kids are the center of their learning, they're learning about what they're interested in, and it will matter to them, and they'll remember it.
Right.
It won't just be like I'm giving you back, what you want to hear. And the thing that's happening, I see a lot in public school, is that kids aren't taught how to think.
Right. Like critical thinking skills or analytical skills or anything like that, you mean?
No, they're just taught shut up, face forward, and regurgitate what I tell you.
Right.
Like get back what I want to hear. But you're not really encouraged to have a different opinion, or not encouraged to even have an opinion. You're not encouraged to form an opinion, or even figure out how you would form an opinion. You're not taught how to think, how to reason, how to debate, how to any life skills are lacking.
Or given enough opportunities just to develop those organically, right? I mean, you're talking about being taught how to do it, but even just given enough time to interact with your peers so you learn it organically. A lot of those things are not things that you even have to be explicitly taught, but when you can interact with other kids, when you can have natural disagreements and then have to resolve them, like you're learning that conflict resolution, you're learning that give and take. And when most of your day is spent avoiding interaction or having the threat of punishment if you interact at the wrong moments, and most of the time it is the wrong moment according to the structure that's in place, yeah, you can definitely those holes don't get filled.
Right. One other thing was that when I was teaching Head Start, and it was Head Start State Preschool, we had like a training, I remember from the training the teacher saying that a 4-year-old in France is more fluent in French than a college graduate who took 4 years of formal French in college,
mm-hmm.
living in America. Right. And the point she was making is that kids learn more just from experience than from being formally taught.
Sure.
And especially having experience with people that they are connected with, people who they love and who love them. And so the point she was making is that if you want to make a difference in your classroom, you have to be involved with the kids, and it's not just formally trying to teach them stuff. So as a homeschool teacher and parent, like, it seems to me like education needs to not be replicating. Like when you're deciding to homeschool, rather than, I think a lot of the mindset, I know for me it kind of is kind of replicating the public school experience in your home.
Right.
Instead of that, thinking about, like, if you look at like a preschooler learns a language. They mm-hmm. learn to walk, they learn to run, they learn to feed themselves, they learn to do a huge amount of things. But no one is sitting down saying, okay, now we're going to practice walking. Now we're going to practice saying, now we're going to practice, it's like informal education. So I'm not sure how that would work as far as all the other subjects, but it seems to me like that would be the model for effective teaching of anything, if it's just a part of your day. Yeah. It's just part of your life, of what you do. You talk about things, and and you, it's like, what's the relevance of learning this? Like there's people who graduate from college who can't balance their checkbook.
Right.
Can't make a budget. They've learned all these, they know math, but they don't know how to apply it.
The applications, right.
Yeah. And so I think that's true with a lot of education. It's like there's a disconnect between, why am I learning this? What relevance does it have in my life? How to incorporate everything that a child is doing, and why did you do this? Why are we having to learn to read? Why are we having to learn to write? What's the relevance of this?
And then how can I apply it so that I actually remember it? I mean, it not only does it give it relevance, but if you apply it in a real world setting, you're going to retain it a lot more than if it just is in isolation.
Learning it.
Right. Well, thank you for taking the time to be my first guest, first of many, we hope. And thank you for introducing me to how great homeschool can be. I value any form of bettering a child's life through education, and I don't think that there's only one right answer or one right fit for any kid. Some kids are going to need different structures, and that's fine, and that's how it is. But for me, I do appreciate that I was homeschooled, and I know that education is often a thankless job, and so I would like to end by thanking you sincerely for everything you did to educate me, the things you've done to educate my sister and other kids, your grandkids. I mean, you've educated my own kids in important and valuable ways, even in giving them experiences with art and other things that they weren't getting elsewhere. So thank you for giving me so many opportunities over the years. And even in this time we've spent together today talking about this stuff, I've learned a ton. So I appreciate your example. I appreciate the education you gave me. And most recently, this gift you gave to me of coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all that you're doing to better educate educators. Finally got the chance to make it
That was my mom, Gail Michael, homeschool pioneer, advocate, and hero. If you like what you heard today, please take a few minutes to give the podcast a positive review to help grow our audience. And be sure to share this episode with the other parents and educators in your life. For more information about how you can become a better educator, head on over to homeschooladvantage.com and check out our free resources, or consider becoming a member to unlock your advantage. Until next time, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at homeschool_advantage, Facebook and YouTube, Homeschool Advantage, and on Twitter at homeschool_ed. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.